I joined and I set goals. And at that time, it was me, my 3 kids, my wife in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Okay.
We had been $25,000 in credit card debt. I was like, all right, I want to buy a house. I don't just want to get out of debt. I
Yep.
want to get out of this apartment. I want some space for my family. So I set that goal and I broke that goal down. Well, what do I got to do? Okay, well, I got to finish paying off my debt. Okay, so that's the first step, pay off my debt. Then what's the next thing? All right, what does my credit score look like?
Yep.
What is my down payment look like? Who's going to help me buy the house? All of these decisions. So these are just goals. This is a goal. This is a goal. This is a goal. These are micro goals on my way to my bigger goal. And I continued that path for 6 months. And we were already in talks to purchase our house.
Wow.
This is The Rise Leader, the podcast dedicated to empowering today's leaders to create lasting impact. Each episode delivers insights, strategies, and inspiration from top professionals and visionary thinkers, designed for those leading teams on the front lines and from the executive suite. Discover actionable tools and inspiring stories to elevate your leadership journey. Step up, make a difference, and join the Rise Leader community.
Welcome to the Rise Leadership Podcast, where we are committed to sharing actionable leadership insights to empower our community to level up their leadership. Today's episode is sponsored by Team 212, where you can make success a habit at myteam212.com. My guest today, which I'm delighted to have, is Hugo Vasquez. Driven by a deep belief in the power of community and structured goal setting, Hugo created Team 212 to help others achieve their dreams. After struggling with obesity and a negative outlook, Hugo's life was transformed when he discovered the power of goal setting and joined an accountability team. This experience ignited a passion for helping others create similar positive change and led him to start his own accountability community. Hugo brings his experience in habit formation, mindset, and productivity to the Team 212 program. His strategic thinking and exceptional communication skills empower members to develop effective strategies, overcome obstacles, and build success-oriented mindsets. Hugo's greatest joy comes from witnessing members' transformation in their lives and building a supportive community where they can thrive. So, Hugo, so delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Just to let the community know, the first place that we ever met, how we actually met, was at Toastmasters. So I had about a, 8 or 10 year layoff from Toastmasters, and I wanted to get back into it because I wanted to level up my public speaking. And I joined the Dobson Ranch Toastmasters Club in Mesa. And at the time, you were the president of that club. And that's how we first met. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah, I remember. And it's funny because before that, I was a completely different person. You were witnessing me right in the middle of one of my transformations. And I say one of because we go through transformations throughout our life multiple times. And before that, I was terrified of public speaking. I was actually one of those people who had gone up, spoken in front of my class at school, and completely froze. I just got in front of the class.
Right.
And since then, I considered myself someone who just I wasn't a public speaker.
Right.
So yeah, that was a different, we can get into that if you'd like, but that was a different time.
Sure. So the title of today's podcast is How to Make 2025 the Best Year of Your Life. But the very first question that I like to ask all my guests is, what has your career path done to shape your leadership style?
I've talked about this in different contexts, but it really did start with my dad taking me to the job site as a little kid. And really him treating me just like he was a foreman in a construction site as a roofer. And when he would take me, I was 10 years old, and he would treat me just like every other worker. he would say, come over here, do it like this. And here's how you cut tile. Here's how you measure your line. Here's how you get up on the roof. And obviously he shouldn't have been putting me up on the roof, but
Right.
he was teaching me. And that was my first real entry into career, and really understanding that a lot of my value came from my ability to contribute to a team
Right.
and to help build this house. My dad was very proud of the houses he would
Work on. Yeah.
and he made it a point after it was done, he would come take me to the site and say, look, it's done. Because we did the roof. There's still more that had to be done on the house, and I didn't get to see it done until he would take me later, months later, or weeks later, or however long later, to say, look, this is what it looks like when it's done.
Wow.
And that really instilled in me in this pride in my work.
So how do we make 2025 the best year of your life? I was going to remind the community here real quick of how it's worked in my life. And my sort of running joke is that I had this epiphany in probably 2013 or so. And it probably happened at the end of March, right? I jokingly say that because March is the end of a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself up, late at night. It was probably around the 30th or 31st of March. And I was up late at night and I was hammering out these goals because we were going the next day or the next 2 days to a company leadership retreat. And I was responsible for reporting out on what my group had done, senior level executive in a home building company,
Mm-hmm.
responsible for a lot of folks and a lot of initiatives. And here I was getting ready to report out on the progress for my group and the organization. And of course, as a good leader, I wanted to make sure that we were not only just looking in the best light, but we had actually done what, we said that we were going to do. And so I was up, late that evening, hammering out, the goals and stuff that I needed to be prepared for that retreat. And it dawned on me, why don't I do this stuff in my personal life, right? Like, you don't see me up, at, you know, 10 o'clock at night, like trying to get my, like trying to figure out why my 401k is not higher, or why my body fat percentage is, or like examining my relationships with my family.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it was sort of this epiphany of the structure that I was exposed to and built in business that got me to simultaneously reflect on, right. And this, my day of Zen was sort of born out of this, because my day of Zen was the personal example of what I was doing in business with these leadership retreats and things of that nature, where you would go away, right? So my day of Zen was get out of the house, but don't go into the office, right? And ultimately it ended up evolving into like going out to the desert, or, in certain times I would go to, Sedona or California or the Grand Canyon or whatever, just the places that are, I like bigger, right? Bigger places that make me think bigger, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So at any rate, that's really the genesis of how this goal setting and how making any particular year the best year of your life has really evolved for me over time. But oh my gosh, has it been powerful, Hugo?
Mm-hmm.
Any of that resonate with you? Or maybe how did your journey of goal setting and development?
I'll answer your question directly of goal setting and how that kind of came into my life. I talked about the early grade school version of
Sure.
me, and then I was an entrepreneur. I had a lemonade stand. I went door to door selling chocolates and sold CDs. And I did all these things to really understand how to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that ultimately, like, this is what my parents taught me, is to get a good job, get a corporate job,
Mm-hmm.
something where that you get a 401k and all this stuff that I didn't even know what it meant.
Right.
And then you're going to be set. This is what they told me. So I did. I got a job right out of high school in fintech, which at the time I didn't know what fintech meant, but it's like financial tech, credit card processing, tech support for a credit card processing company. And that's where they taught us how to set goals. Hey, here's the company's goal at the top level. Here's your department's goal. Here's your team's goal. Now, what's your goal to roll up to that?
Sure.
And we would be kind of kind of given goals, right? Like, here's your target. Now, how are you going to get to that target? And it was really boring and I hated it. It was a chore, just like like the last day of the quarter to try to get those in. My boss telling me, hey, remember, like, get those in. And your bonus depends on this and whatever. Right. And I would just do them and just get them done. Really didn't put too much mind into it until one of my bosses, she was a director of our department. She approached it in a completely different way.
Okay.
She asked me what my goals were. She said, what is your goal? Why are you here? Where do you want to be? Like, where do you want to be? What are you trying to get out of this job other than the money? And once she understood that, she helped me set personal goals and then she rolled them up. She taught me how to roll them up into the corporate
tie
goals.
it to.
Right.
Wow.
And that taught me this ownership of my goals. And that was the seed, which we'll get into a little bit more with my journey into personal goals. Because when you talked about going to the Grand Canyon and setting goals, that's a new goal for me. Now that you just mentioned that, I want to do that one day. Similar to you and experiencing these personal goal setting retreats, what you realize is when you get out of the routine of your day to day, you're able to step away and look at it, right? Like, you talked about going to California or going to the Grand Canyon. You can just go to a park, anything that's outside of your routine, right? And as soon as you get out of that routine and you can analyze it, you can separate yourself from it, you can start deciding if you want that or something else. To me, that's where the beginning of goal setting starts, self-reflection and analyzing your life.
Yep. And that is the segue into the first place that I wanted to start, which was reflection, right? So understanding, well, first of all, where you are, right? You can understand where you are when you step on a scale or when you open up your, you get your statement from your bank or your 401k, or you can understand where you are in your relationship if you have a significant one with like a spouse or with your children, if you have children, or even if you don't, what is your relationship with friends and all that. And the beautiful part of self-reflection is you get to decide whether where you're at right now is okay. Or if not, if there is something that you want different, right? If the number on the scale is a number that's not you're not comfortable with, or the relationship that you have with your parents or your siblings or your children is not where you would want it to be, then it just starts with understanding where you're at, right? That's the reflection piece. And we've got different things that we can talk about here. I don't know if you're not a Wheel of Life fan, but I like the Wheel of Life. And if you're not familiar with this, we'll link to it in the show notes. And there's several different versions that are available for absolutely free on the internet. And it basically just gets you to give yourself a self-reflective score in the various areas of your life. It could be, as I'm alluding to, health and relationships, or your effectiveness in business, or even right down to one you've already mentioned, which is personal development. So you started the conversation by talking about reflection. I just went a little bit further. What's your best way to reflect and sort of decide where you're at for either you or the folks that come into your Team 212 program?
Well, I want to answer that question two different ways, because people in the audience may be at different stages. And depending on the stage you're at, I've found different types of reflections to be more beneficial.
Okay.
I reflect weekly and monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And those reflections are just a list of questions that I ask myself at those specific time periods. Quarter reflection is just me looking back at monthly reflection answers.
Okay.
My monthly reflection is me looking back at weekly reflections, and so on. I'm constantly, every day, every second, reflecting on the past, not living in the past, which is different, reflecting on it, saying, how is that decision affecting me right now? Right? Like, for example, last night, I went to bed earlier than what I would have normally gone to bed because I knew we had this podcast, and I feel energized.
Good.
I feel cognizant. You know what I mean? So I'm reflecting on that good decision. However, when I first started this, that's not how it worked, because if I did that, most of my reflections would have been on bad decisions. And, I think for a long time, I would do that. I would reflect on the bad decisions, and then those decisions would just make me feel bad about myself.
Okay.
And they would destroy my self-esteem. So in my reflections early on, and the way I guide people who are just starting to get into goal settings, is reflect on who you want to be.
Right.
You think about your future self. Your future self, hopefully, is an ideal version of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're in a growth mindset, your future self has succeeded in places where your current self struggles, right?
Love
So
that.
you are your future self to your past self.
Mm,
So how are you currently succeeding in places where your past self struggled? And that is how I recommend people, especially getting into personal development,
Sure.
reflect. How am I better now than I was before?
Right.
That's the first question. And then, that leads into the next part, which is where do I want to go?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both empowering questions.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Empowering. So love that. If we're clear on where we've been, now I want to talk about getting clear on your why.
Mhm.
Like, why would, and maybe it starts with that feeling that you get when you reflect, and even though you're thinking in a positive way, there's a gap, right,
Yeah.
between where you are and where you could be. And that could be in your thinking, it could be in your actions, or it could be in the results, right? So how do you get clear on what you really want or what you really want to be? Because I think we both know that's typically why people get into accountability groups, is they do have focus on what they want and they know, but they're not taking the actions they need to do to get them there.
Mhm.
And for every one of those, we might see 2, 3, 4 or more who even have trouble getting clarity on what they really do want, right? So
Right.
it's like a muscle to build. So can you talk a little bit about either the process that you use or you use with your new team members to get clear on what they might really want?
There's a prerequisite to a lot of personal development, and that is a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
A growth mindset means you believe that you are not fixed in your habits, you're not fixed in your character. You can change, evolve, and grow. That's a growth mindset.
Yep.
That's step number one. If you don't have that, then we got to go back to the basics. But assuming you have a growth mindset, then who is your future self, right? Really identifying that future self. I would even describe that future self version. Some people are more visual and they can draw it out, draw
Mm-hmm.
that version of themselves and
Right.
how they imagine themselves looking, and what kind of clothes they imagine themselves wearing, where they imagine themselves being,
Yeah.
where do they imagine themselves spending their time visually. Maybe you just meditate on that. Some
Mhm.
people just want to meditate on that, but really get clear on what your future self looks like. Now, what's the difference between you and that future version of yourself?
Right. Like that gap.
That's the gap.
Yeah.
But that question, what's the difference? Because the first thing you got to do is picture that future self.
Yep.
Because if you don't, then all you're going to be doing is thinking, how am I not good enough?
Right.
But if you picture your future self, the question isn't how am I not good enough? The
Yep.
question is, how do I get there?
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that. So the word that I'll typically use is speculate, right? And I'm a big fan of speculating in chunks of time. You mentioned chunks of time before in reflection. I'm a big fan of chunks of speculation into the future, right? I love to think about sort of 10 years plus.
Mm.
If you think in 10-year plus, you can put things on your list that I refer to as like scary shit, right? Like things that would normally scare you if you had to contemplate like how you're going to get that done in the next year or 3.
Yeah.
So you can put some scary stuff on the list, things that, maybe even take your breath away when you say like, is that too big for me to think like that, right?
Yeah.
And you just put it on your list anyway. And that's part of the fun to me in speculation. But then after your 10-year with, semi-scary stuff on it, then you get into sort of that 3 to 5 year chunk, which for me starts to get really tangible, and yet things that you can take action on to make happen in 3 to 5 years, to be in the best shape of your life almost anybody in the world could do in probably 3-ish to 5 years. You might be able to do it in a year if you were super motivated, but everybody probably knows you're not going to do it in a month, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is when they imagine themselves doing it in a month. This idea of speculating into the future, 3 to 5, and then the next is the year. That's where I get the most, what would I say, formal, where it's really a reflective planning process. That's probably, between like probably a year a month, maybe a quarter, but a year and a month or a week and or a day are probably the most common timeframes for goal setting. Annual planning in business works that way. And then if you work for public companies or some other companies, the quarter is the next one. I plan in months,
Yeah.
right? I also belong to an accountability team that plans in quarters. So I do plan out the quarter, but I'm more intense for my year and I'm more intense for my month. Because what I say about a month is like, this is a good chunk of time, right? And if you don't go back and reflect at the end of a month, and I also love your weekly version,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as intentional as you are with your week, but my month guides my weeks. And again, this is all idiosyncratic, right?
Right.
There is no right way. There is no one way to do any of these things. We're both successful folks and we do things some different ways. So that's the other thing that I want the community to hear is there's no right way,
Yeah.
because these things need to resonate with you, right? The style, the
cadence of your life. I think what you talked about about the weekly and monthly,
yeah,
I'm the opposite. So although I do both, I don't put as much emphasis on the monthly. My monthly really is just looking back at my weekly,
Yep.
because I am more emphasized on a weekly basis. As you're setting goals for your life, you start thinking about, okay, is this a daily goal? Is this a weekly goal? Or is this something that's going to take me all quarter?
All right. So if we reflected and we know where we are, if we got energy around what the strong why, like, why do I want this for the future? And now I've either speculated or I've looked into the future, like we've just decided and say, hey, there is a gap in what I want, or there's a gap in who I'm being, or there's definitely a gap between what I want and where I'm at right now. I'm not living in the house I want, or I'm not, looking in the mirror and seeing the body I want, right?
Mhm.
And it happens a lot of ways, right? So if we get clear on all that, then now let's talk about, and we will talk about how to set goals, but let's just imagine for a minute we've got goals set. I want to talk about accountability because it's built, right into the name of these teams that we've been referring to, and how accountability can be. And I think we both like this is something that has like revolutionized how we do what we do independently. So can you talk a little bit about accountability teams, or how you see accountability and goal setting as an effective part of the overall strategy?
It is. The first time I was invited to an accountability group,
Yeah.
I turned it down. I said, no way. What? You want me to get in front of other people and tell them what my goals are? And then they're going to judge me? They're going to tell me, like, they're going to ask me questions. They're going to have an opinion about my goals. And it sounded not only ridiculous, but like pointless. Like, why? And then the friend who invited me to an accountability group, he joined, and this was 2020.
Okay.
I actually just looked back at my goals that I set that beginning of that year. And I as soon as COVID shutdowns happened,
Mhm.
that derailed all of my goals. I said, screw my goals. Like, the world is ending. It was the easiest excuse to just let go of my goals because I had nobody to be accountable to. And now I had this other distraction.
Mhm.
And then a couple months later, I check in with my friend and I'm like, hey man, how are you doing this year? He's like, great, just hit like all these goals and I'm taking the last 2 months off.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I hit my financial goals. So I'm just decided to take November and December off. And I'm like, what? How did you do that? He's like, the accountability group I told you about. I'm like, okay, man.
Okay, now let me know more.
Yeah. And I joined and I set goals. And at that time, it was me, my 3 kids, and our dog, our pit bull, and my wife in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Okay.
We had just started kind of digging out of debt. We had been $25,000 in credit card debt. I was like, all right, I want to buy a house. I don't just want to get out of debt. That's very scarcity thinking. I want to get out of this apartment. I want some space for my family. So I set that goal and I broke that goal down. Well, what do I got to do? Okay, well, I got to finish paying off my debt. Okay, so that's the first step, pay off my debt. Then what's the next thing? All right, what does my credit score look like?
Yep.
What is my down payment look like? Who's going to help me buy the house?
Mhm.
All of these decisions. So these are just goals. This is a goal. This is a goal. This is a goal. These are micro goals on my way to my bigger goal. And I was going to my accountability calls every week. And some weeks I would fail. Some weeks I would say I didn't accomplish my goal. Some weeks I would succeed. And I continued that path for 6 months. And we were already in talks to purchase our house.
Wow.
I couldn't have predicted it, right? I didn't go, oh, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this.
Sure.
It was like, here's my goal. Now I'm going to break that down. And on my journey through my accountability sessions, people gave me some advice. Oh, that's not the right path. Try this.
Right.
Oh, wait, this is working for you. Double down on that.
Yeah.
This is the journey.
Mhm.
And that's how it manifested. Before that, I had set goals and I had some success.
Mhm.
If I can accomplish it, then that's success. But anything until then is failure, right? In my mind, there were no little wins along the
Right.
way.
What I call winning or learning, right?
Exactly.
You could just reframe failure into
I wasn't
okay,
learning.
if I
wasn't
learned
learning.
something. Yeah.
Right. I was failing because I wasn't
Love that.
taking it. But when I had the accountability group, those failures turned into learnings, because
Right.
when I would approach my group as like, man, this is how I failed, they would share the knowledge that I just shared.
Yeah.
And then that picked me up. They were literally supporting me through my journeys.
And that, I think, was the other important point that I wanted to make, because I think when your general public or your folks in the community hear like accountability group, it's like, why would I pay money like you said? But your sort of idea of what this meant was like, I can't even fathom showing up to some place and telling a bunch of people like what my goals are. First of all, like that's private, right? So within accountability group, there is a sort of understanding, right? It's not exactly the same as like your spouse or a significant other where it's that close, or, maybe going into a church or whatever religion you are and sharing what your struggles are with somebody that, is a person of faith or whatever.
Right.
So it's not the same as either one of those, but it's not also, when you hear accountability group, it's like you're going to get on a phone call or a Zoom call or something, and people are going to be like, what the hell are you doing, Hugo? Like, what do you mean you didn't do your X, Y, or Z? And of course, there is an element of accountability, which it usually looks more like questions, right? That end up, like probing, okay, so you fell off the wagon on your nutrition plan through the week, Hugo.
Right.
So is there something you could have done differently? That's what accountability typically looks like, rather than some finger wagging. You use the other word that it is probably more of than accountability, which is support. After being in accountability teams now myself for a couple, 2-3 years, like it's 85% accountability, or pardon me, 85% support.
Yeah.
And then this other smaller percentage of accountability, which I think we would both also say is like 95% of the accountability there is your own. It gets you to raise the level of your own personal accountability. And that is closing that gap, right, between who you were actually showing up and being and who you could be. So I don't know if there are any thoughts on any of that.
The idea of showing up to an accountability call and getting yelled at, that's the fear that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized when I showed up and I didn't get yelled at was that was all in my head.
Right.
I'm yelling at myself. I'm the one that's treating myself the way I think other people are going to treat me.
Right.
And that was a revelation. It took me a while to realize that, but that was a revelation that actually changed my whole life, because it made me realize that I was beating myself up way more than anybody else. So me sharing it was actually, it was honestly like somebody kind of saving me from myself.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's not as bad as I'm making it out
to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the other beauty that you can get from an accountability team, is that maybe that's the third leg. If it's support and accountability, you can also get a really healthy outside perspective, right? Because the other thing about, just being in the general community is, and I hate to say it this way, but the standards are awfully low, right, for performance, right? And that is the other benefit, because when like the way that my life works, I've been in the military and high performing executive person and all this. And sometimes when I share with other people, my own family, or just other people in general, and I share like how I think, or I go do these days of Zen or whatever, and I know there's probably a goodly number of people that are like, that's over the top, Jeff. Like, what,
Yeah.
why do you do all that? And I'm like, well, because I've seen the other side, right? And so that, I wasn't even thinking about this, but that is one of the other benefits that you get. I'm not really fond of the term getting with like-minded people,
Yeah.
right? That feels like very network marketing or something, but yeah, a tribe. I mean, that's another good way to think of it, right? These are things that I felt on a football field in high school, or I felt, in the military, where
Mhm.
you get around a group that is sort of, motivated by the same thing and for the same reason.
Right.
That's a powerful feeling.
The community that's built around it.
Yes, the
So
community.
I want to dig into this idea
Sure.
because
Mhm.
when I was in elementary school, I moved around a lot in different schools. I never really kind of settled in, but I got along with a lot of different groups and I learned how to get along. But in junior high, we moved into the hood, low income, the projects. And I had to adapt to that environment. And that was new. That was something that I didn't know how to adapt to.
Mm,
The violence,
mm.
the intimidation, the gangs. First week of school, some kid threatens to beat me up. He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna kick your ass after school."
Mm.
And I don't know what this means, but I'm terrified. I'm avoiding this kid all day.
Right.
At the end of the day, he rides my bus, so he's on my bus, and I'm thinking I'm safe, I'm good. We get to the first bus stop, and the bus driver stops, opens the door, nobody gets out of the bus. So then the bus driver moves, goes to the second bus stop. And this is a bus full of kids. It's completely full. Opens the door, nobody gets off.
You know what's coming.
I did not know what's coming.
Okay.
We know what's coming.
Okay.
Everybody listening know what's coming. 12-year-old
Hugo
me
didn't
did
know.
not know what was happening. I was confused. We get to the third bus stop, my bus stop. The door opens, I get up, I'm at the front of the bus, and instantly I hear a cacophony of people stand up in unison. I walk out and they wall me into an alleyway and they push me into an alley. I have no idea what's happening now. At this point, I'm terrified. I was fearing for my life.
I'll bet.
They push me into this alleyway where there's like a 4-way intersection and there's a car blocking one of the way, 2 like motorcycles blocking another way. And then where we came in, and then kids and adults just gathered to see this kid get beat up.
Oh, wow.
I'm shaking. Something inside me woke up in that moment, and I just lunged at this kid. I grabbed him, and I just started beating him up. I just started wailing on him, and somebody had to break me off of him. They broke me off of him. Okay, you won. Then I'm on the floor still shaking. By the time I realize what happened, everyone is gone. Completely gone. That's it. It was over. I walk home. The next day at school, I am invited to the lunch table. I'm asked to come to the table.
Wow.
No metaphor there, literally the table. A couple of weeks later, somebody comes up to me. I'm at my lunch table. They come up to me. They start saying stuff to me. Before I'm even able to process what's happening, everybody around me stands up and says, "If you're messing with him, you're messing with us."
Oh, wow. So you
That,
get this power of,
as a kid who's terrified, that feels powerful.
right.
It feels tempting. And then what do you have to do to continue that?
Right.
I was in that neighborhood for 2 years. Luckily, we moved out, and then in high school, we moved to Gilbert, Arizona, the complete opposite place, Gilbert High School.
Right.
My freshman year, I tried some of that intimidation stuff. Didn't really work out.
Right.
Or it didn't work out because I got in trouble. Like,
Right.
I got
In a different environment.
right, completely. I got suspended, and it was like, okay, this isn't the tool.
Right.
And then it took me 4 years to unlearn all that. It took me 4 years to unlearn that mentality. And, I really struggled in school. Before my senior year, at the end of the previous year, my counselor calls me in and says, "Hey, you are in real danger of not graduating." And he lays it all out and says, "I'm going to make you a plan. Next year, you got to take all of these classes that you failed all through high school. You got to take an early class. Your friends, they get half days because they did their work. You got to take a full day in an early class. And if you happen to pass every single class, you can graduate.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't pass one of these classes, you got to redo it."
Laid it on the line for you.
Yeah. So those were the consequences, right? He laid the consequences on the line. And the next year, I changed my attitude. And that senior year, I studied, I worked, and I got straight A's. I'd never gotten a legit A where I felt like I was proud, like I
Yeah.
did work to get
Worked
that.
hard
Yeah.
and earned it.
And that made me realize I had the ability to really make my own destiny. But it required that. Now, this is in hindsight. I realized it was that accountability. It was that consequence, because if I did not pass, my grandma would find out. And
Then it wasn't going to be good.
right. Well, my grandma loves me. She wasn't going to do anything bad, but she was going to be disappointed. I didn't want to disappoint my grandma.
Got you.
And that was the consequence. This is accountability, right? My grandma was my community.
I love that.
Where we're at here with Team 212 and personal development. Even though I unlearned a lot of that stuff, a lot of that mentality still followed me throughout life. And I had anger issues. Every time there was a conflict, I tried solving it with violence. Because I didn't know, I didn't have people around me that were different. When I joined that accountability group, I was surrounded with people who had a different idea of what success was and different standards. And that is a different type of community.
Yes.
That's the community that we really are building at Team 212.
Yes.
People who want to see you succeed.
Right. No, I love that. Love that. A lot of power on that story, Hugo. So let's talk about, there are 100 different ways I've already alluded to. I'm going to talk a little bit about SMART goal setting, just because it's probably one of the most common. It doesn't work for everybody. It has worked extremely effectively for me, and I have done it in different ways. So probably a lot of folks are familiar with SMART goal setting, but if you're not, it's an acronym, right? The S is specific. So getting really specific, that is one of the things that you see just in general and in community, is folks have a vague notion or a fuzzy notion. And that's why you can never really work towards what you're trying to get, because you're not even really clear on what it is. So being specific. And then measurable, right? You can do that in a lot of different ways. You can write a little number in a box, or you can step on a scale. When you can tie your goals to something specific and then measurable, you can count and you can know whether you're on track or off track, right? And then there's A, which I usually use for actionable. There's some philosophies out there that say achievable, so that, makes it where you're not picking the pie in the sky kind of a thing. But I'm a big fan of actionable, because once you've actually went through the goal setting process, the real key to success is taking action to get there, right? Not like sitting in a, sofa in the secret, fashion, like rubbing crystals together and trying to get something, which I'm not totally opposed to, but I found it most effective when I go do things that work towards the focus. And honestly, I've just become really good at doing that part. I think it's part of the success formula. And then there's relevant, right? Which, again, a lot of other people call this realistic, trying to paint it into this pie in the sky scenario. But I like relevant, because there's no reason in writing things down. I know you and I have both been through this evolution where, you might even decide that a goal is the right goal for you. And then you start working on it and you're like, oh, it'd be cool to do that thing.
Right.
And then you write the goal down and you start doing it. And next thing you know, you're like, this is not only not cool, like, I don't even really want this, which is, it's okay to evolve through that process. So maybe we can let you riff on that. And then the last is the T, which is time bound, right? So tying it to, I'm going to eat clean for 7 days in a row, or I'm going to, tying it to a calendar, tying it to a day. So again, if you use all these SMART acronyms together, it's a pretty effective way to what I call the science of goal achievement, right? What I'm just talking about now is how to set goals, which gets a lot of airplay about how to set goals. But to me, setting is just one part of the process. I'm into goal achievement. How do you make a system where, again, through speculation, you can just conjure up what you want, regardless of what it is? And that's my belief, is there's literally nothing that I can decide that I don't want, that I can't write down. And then it's just a math equation. It's like, how much effort and focus do I need to put in, and how much time will it take to make to happen? I'm like the water running down the Grand Canyon. I'm going to be here a long time. And so if I decide I want a big hole in the ground, then I'm going to be carving, right? Because I've seen how it works over time and I understand. And we don't always know what the time is. That's why we make things time bound, because we want to pick a time. Not always do you achieve your goals in the time that you maybe think it's going to take. And even if you reflect back and look at, if I did everything that I said that I was going to do and I still didn't achieve it, then I just say, well, I must have picked the wrong time. Or I might look back and say, hey, maybe I did everything that I said that I was going to do, but that just might not have been enough. It might not have been enough time, or it might not have been enough action. To this day, I have never written anything down that I have not been able to achieve in action or time. Now, there are things on my list right now that I have not achieved yet. A couple of things would be like private pilot, or, about like the big RV that I want to, drive around the country. So I haven't done either one of those things. They're sort of on in between like my 3 to 5 year list and that 10-year scary thing, right? Become a private pilot. I'm like, wow. I mean, it's scary fun to me to think about it that way. There's a lot there about SMART goals. There are many ways procedurally to set goals. What I know of you, this is a big part of your success, is
Setting
the
goals.
process. Yes.
Yeah. I want to go a couple of different places. I'll put a pin on setting goals. To me, is really mapping your vision.
Okay.
But I'll come back to that. You talked about the RV, and we've talked about this a couple of times. I'm going to put this out. I have this vision of doing an RV trip, and I think that there's a way that we can do this together. So maybe, I'm just putting that seed out there, but like some Rise Leadership Team 212 type of project where we go on an RV across the country and then we change lives while also
I love that.
viewing. But first of all, that's step number one. You got to speak your goals into the people who can make it happen, right? You're not going to speak it into the people who are going to bring you down and say that that's impossible.
Right.
You want to speak it into the uplifting people. You reflected on the past, and then you've identified your future self, and you said, what's different between me now and my future self? Now you have your list of things. I love that you use the SMART method because it really makes it specific. Okay, now that I know the things that I need to do to get to that future version of myself, whether it's changing my habits, whether it's learning skills, or whether it's literally just taking that trip. Like, my future version of me is taking that trip on the RV.
Sure.
But right now I'm terrified of that idea. What if I get a flat tire? What if, we run out of gas? What if? What if?
Yeah.
Right now, fear is a part of it. I need to address that. So I want to talk about the crystal rubbing. It sounds ridiculous. Somebody sitting there with their eyes closed and just rubbing crystals. I think that what the purpose of that really is connecting with yourself.
Sure.
The way I do it is through meditation, and I just sit down every morning and close my eyes. And there's different forms of meditation that I've done, but right now what I'm thinking about is this just silent meditation of watching your thoughts. You watch them. You don't attach yourself to them, and you watch them, and you really identify what are those fears that are keeping you from that future version of yourself, right? What are the things when you start thinking about it that come up as excuses of why you can't? And you got to write those down because it's bumping around in your head and it's stopping you from even taking that first step. So identifying all those roadblocks, that's what meditation or silent crystal rubbing is for. But I think the action part is the critical step, right? Because once you've identified everything that, okay, cool, I know the vision, I know the path, I close my eyes, I see all of the roadblocks. I need to learn how to drive an RV. This is a skill. I need to find out about insurance. This is a task, an action item. So you write down all those action items, you write down all those skills, and then you make a plan. And that's where the vision map or the goal map comes into play.
Love
and
that.
You say, okay, in these next 12 weeks, what are the things that I can do? And now you talked about taking those steps and then looking back and saying, was that time frame too small? To me, that's what we're going to do every quarter, no matter what, right? Like the time frame is a guess. If you've ever done any project management work, or I know you've worked with project managers, right?
Yeah.
We're guessing based off previous experience.
Sure.
And the more previous experience you have, the better guess you can make. But as you're going towards that goal early on, you're going to have very little previous experience. So your first target, your first quarter goal, you're probably not going to hit it. Just going to say that.
Right.
That's what your accountability group is there for, because once you start getting that feedback, they'll be like, oh yeah, you wanted to sell 100,000 units in 3 months. That's not possible. You got to start here, and you got to build this infrastructure.
Sure.
And that's when you start taking those action steps and getting that feedback, and then making those adjustments week by week. A question that I ask myself is, how do I know I achieved it? How will I know I achieved it? And that is where I can measure it, right? Like it's either, a certain number, a certain quantity. Sometimes it's a feeling.
Yes.
Sometimes I'm able to wake up feeling like I want to embrace the day.
Yep.
That's the goal. Because you can feel that yourself, right?
Yes.
You can say saying, this morning, do I feel like that? No. This morning, do I feel like that? No. And then one day, yes.
Yes. That the personal version for me is, what does it look like to win?
Yeah.
Right. I actually, it works the same. I was just at a leadership retreat the last 2 days, and oftentimes when the team is turning what they have decided they want into the actual goals, the question I'll ask is, okay, we're going to be back here in 3 months at the end of this next quarter. How do we know that we've won?
Yeah.
Right. What does winning look like?
Yeah. I like winning.
What I've found in life is that if you can tie what you want to something bigger than you just used a perfect example and I'm a hell yes on the RV road trip, just FYI. But what you said was, hey, let's go take this road trip together. Let's drive around the country or whatever, and let's help other people get better. Mm-hmm. Right. So you took the idea that I had about the RV and driving around and seeing, the sights around the country kind of thing, and then added this other element to it. Well, you added the element where we do it together, and then you added the element where we help other people. And that is sort of the spirit of what I'm talking about here. Is what I found in my life and in business is, if you tie your goals that are tied to something bigger than just you, mm-hmm. and don't get me wrong, I've got plenty of goals that are around me, right? Like if I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, there's a goal that says, I want to look better, at the pool, or just when I look at myself in the mirror. But I can take that very same goal of wanting to be in better shape myself and say, yeah, but I have children and I have grandchildren, and I want to, me, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to live to at least 103.
Yeah.
And I still, like, this is kind of morbid, but I'll just say it, my joke with my kids is like, who's going to be carrying whose casket, right? I'm on a mission here. So like, if you're not serious about, your health and your mindset and doing the right thing, and my oldest is 30, right? And I'll turn 55 here in a month or 2 months. And I'm serious about, and I don't mean serious like my hope is that I can inspire them to live even longer than me at 103.
Yeah.
And we can all live, long, full lives. But again, just an example of how you can tie your goals to something. And it to me, it gives it power, right? Like when we say, figure out what your why is.
Yeah.
That's why I have these goals, like live to 103, because my why is, and that I've been studying health span versus lifespan.
Right.
I don't want to live to 103 just because it's a non-round number that's over 100. I want to live to 103. I want to live vibrantly, right? I've got a lot. I'm the water running down the Grand Canyon, right? So I've got a lot to do here, and I want to be in good shape to do it. So that's Jeff's way, right? Mm-hmm. Of putting it outside of you. Any thoughts on that part?
I agree with you on health span. I think a lot of people talk about living long lives, but I think the way you're approaching it now is like, no, I just want to experience this life. And it's not just to consume as much of it as possible. It's to enjoy as much of it as possible. And that makes a big difference. And when you talked about, who else am I doing this for? Aisha, one of my mentors, has this question that she taught me, because I ask it to myself all the time, is who else wins when I win?
I love that.
Yeah. And that question has gotten me out of some slumps, because I've been in those slumps where it's like, I don't even want to do this. You know what? I don't want the end result anymore. I don't care. I don't care. And then I asked myself, but wait a minute, who else wins when you win?
Right.
And then I remember my kids, and then
Yeah.
I remember my wife, and then I remember my mom and my dad and my brother, my sister, and my nieces and nephews. And I go, oh yeah, okay, let's do this.
Love that.
Relationships are exponential. They're not additive, right? Like you bring a bad person in your life, and they're not just going to make your life a little bit worse.
Mhm.
They're going to make your life miserable, right? If you bring a good person in your life, they're going to make your life phenomenal.
So one of the other things I want to talk about here is process goals versus outcome goals. And I alluded to this before, and I'm a big fan of both. I do both, right? Usually with smart goal setting, I'll decide what my end in mind is, and I'll come up with the time frame or the number. Again, go through the smart setting process, which to me are a lot of times outcome focused. Like by this time, I will be this, right? But I'm also a big fan of process goals. And a lot of that to me is when you take the outcome and then you've mentioned this a little bit before, but then you break it down, right? And you say, this is what I need to do. Because this struck me before when you said like feeling good in the end with like the outcome, or you can go 3 days and then one day can feel good.
Right.
I love process goals because you can feel good about the success that you're having every single day, even if the end result has not been met yet, right?
Yeah.
If you know that you need to eat clean on a regular basis to ultimately get to a better fitness goal that might be 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year from now, and you can, work up the feelings and the emotion that's sort of tied to doing a good job,
Every day.
showing up the way that you said you would. There's a lot of for me, there's a lot of satisfaction in that, knowing, and the beauty is you don't have to wait for the outcome. You can feel the joy of success daily.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the whole process versus outcome. Again, I'm a big fan of both.
Yeah. I think so. Just to kind of, I guess, set the stage and define some of these terms, process goals are like, I'm going to meditate every day, right? Like there's no outcome I'm trying to get to. I just want to build a habit of meditating every day.
Yes.
Or I'm going to read a book every month. And although there's an outcome of reading a book, it's more just like, this is constant. I'm going to read every day, which will equal a book every month. Versus an outcome goal might be, I want to get Construction 101 Rise Leadership certified.
Yeah.
Once you do that, check, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think what you talked about, about enjoying the process, that needs to be baked into everything.
Right.
Right. So if you do have an outcome goal of getting the certification, how are you enjoying the week to week process? And
Right.
that's critical. The process goals have that baked in, right? Because you get that little bit of dopamine when you hit that goal.
Right.
However, if you start falling off, then you start kind of feeling like you're on this downward trend of, well, I haven't been doing this. And that's where really you have to ask yourself, how am I intrinsically, internally motivated?
Yes.
What makes me naturally feel good? Some people really like that external validation. And if that's you, then you want to have some kind of process goal where you're constantly getting that good job. Right. But some people, they don't want to hear it. My son, he loves to build. My 6-year-old son, Leonardo, he loves to build these intricate trains. We have all these train sets, multiple, like 5 different train sets that all interconnect. So he just dumps them all and he starts building. And he gets stuck. When he was younger, he would get stuck. Like, how do I make this connect over here? And I'd try to help him. And he's just zoned out. He's like, no. He's in it. And he's building it. And he is enjoying that process. And at the end, his goal was to build this train track. And he feels great about it. So that, if you're that type of person who I just want to go in and then at the end be satisfied with my work, then an outcome goal is probably going to be a
There you go.
better option.
Great way to articulate that, Hugo. I love that. Why don't you tell the community a little bit more about Team 212 and how it operates? So the structure of what you do within the program, maybe the system that you utilize, and then we've already hit sort of the high level of what support and accountability can look like within a group like this, but just how it looks specifically within Team 212.
Yeah, Team 212, like I said, was born out of the accountability group that I was in, where we met weekly. Originally, we would meet weekly and say, "Hey, did you hit your target from the previous week? Yes or no?" And if you didn't hit your target, there would be some consequences, usually in the form of burpees and some monetary fines that you'd have to pay. However, we found that you get 80% of that benefit of accountability from just sharing your progress, or your learnings. I
Right.
like your version of that, your learnings. So what we do is, all you got to do is share your goal with us. We have a quarterly goal setting. If you're able to make the quarterly goal setting, you join that and you share your goal. If you're not, you just fill out your goal map, which is basically your SMART goal
Mhm.
and your plan. You fill out your goal map and you share it with the community, saying, "Here is my goal." And everybody shares their goals. So you get to see what other people's goals are, and you get to see what they're doing to make progress. Then every week, you check in with your progress. What did you do for each one of your goals? Did you do what you said you were going to do? Yes or no? And then you score yourself 1 through 4, right? 4 means I did everything.
Mm.
3 means I did most things. 2 means I did some. 1 means I did a few, or 0 means I didn't do any of it.
Mm.
And the reason you're scoring yourself is really to keep track of your progress and see that you will get better, right? We all set these goals, and then 2 weeks in, we haven't made the progress we thought we were going to make. So we
Right.
beat ourselves up and we
Right.
let go of them. However, they did this study for people who were trying to quit smoking.
Okay.
And they had different levels of accountability, right? Started from just thinking like, "Hey, I want to quit smoking," all the way down to having regular weekly meetings with your accountability group and sharing your progress.
Sure.
So first of all, if you just share your goal with somebody else, you have a 65% chance of actually accomplishing your goal.
Just by sharing it.
This was across people who are trying to quit smoking. That's one of the hardest things that people can try to do. 65% were able to quit just by sharing it. The surprising thing is 95% of people who regularly met with their group and shared their accountability, by the end of the study, were able to quit smoking.
There you go.
95.
I
And
love those odds.
that's the difference, right? That's where just sharing that goal. So that's what we're aiming for. Is we want you to join the community, share with us what your goal is, and share with us regularly what your accountability is. And every Monday we meet, every Monday morning on Zoom, and you just spend your couple of minutes saying, "Hey, here's what I did," and people ask you some questions like, "Why didn't you do that?"
Right.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, great. If folks go to myteam212.com,
Yes.
and we have the coupon code RISE LEADER.
Yes.
And if you use coupon code RISE LEADER, you'll get 20% off of your 2025 subscription to Team 212.
Correct. When you go on the website, there's an application process, because we're fostering a certain type of community, and
Sure.
we want people who are growth minded. So there is an application. Fill it out, and then once you fill it out, I'll reach out to you, and then we'll get connected.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So last 2 questions that I ask all of my guests. Who has been the most impactful leader in your career thus far?
Yeah, for me, it was my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad, from an early age, really showed me what it was to be a leader, because my mom, she's always had 2 jobs and a side job, right? Like 2
Mm.
full-time jobs and a side job, or 2
Hustling.
jobs and a
Yeah.
business. And my dad's the type of guy who you don't ever see him just sitting around. Like
Mm.
if he's doing something around the house, and he always, when I was growing up, would teach me how to appreciate the work that I did.
Mm.
The leadership that my dad instilled in me was something that I didn't value until I saw people who didn't have it.
Mm.
Until I saw people who weren't motivated to accomplish something. And I'm like, "Well, don't you feel good at the end of the day when you've completed it?" I'm like, "No, I just want to get this done." Oh, okay. That's when my dad did that.
Mm.
And then my mom showed me that you got to work hard for the things that really matter to you.
Love that.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Very last question then. What is the best actionable leadership lesson that you have learned in your life or career? Could you share that with the community?
Yeah. There are consequences, whether you know it or not, to your actions, right? Whether you know what the consequences are. And accountability allows you to feel those consequences in real time, because it feels bad to tell somebody you didn't do what you said you were going to do. We're inherently wired to want to be consistent with what we say.
Right.
And I think that if you can feel that consequence of sharing your learnings, I almost use the F word, sharing your learnings consistently, you build that habit and you lose that fear.
I love that. Love that. All right. Well, Hugo, thank you so much for taking time to share some of your super powerful stories, the community that you are building within Team 212. I've got some experience there and can definitely validate that. Thank you to our sponsor, Team 212. So that's myteam212.com. We've come up with our special coupon code of Rise Leader, which will get you 20% off either the monthly version or the 2025 subscription. I would like to thank the Rise Leader community. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, like, share, and please, if you're willing, leave us a review. And thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of The Rise Leader. Thanks for joining us today. To connect further, visit riseleadershipaz.com, where you can find show notes, resources, and more episodes. You can also find The Rise Leader on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback helps us reach more leaders and continue to deliver valuable content. Until next time, remember to step up, make a difference, and lead with impact. This is The Rise Leader, signing off.